Hi, welcome to today's reading of the 1919 edition of Aesop for Children. My name is John Joyce. I'm a staff person at Gettysburg Library, and today I'll be reading pages 58 to 62, beginning with the fable entitled The Heron. So sit back, relax, and listen as a bunch of animals learn, oftentimes the hard way, some important life lessons for the benefit of us, Aesop's discerning readers. The Heron. A heron was walking sedately along the bank of a stream, his eyes on the clear water, and his long neck and pointed bill ready to snap up a likely morsel for his breakfast. The clear water swarmed with fish, but Master Heron was hard to please that morning. "No small fry for me," he said. "Such scanty fare is not fit for a heron." Now a fine young perch swam near. "No, indeed," said the heron. "I wouldn't even trouble to open my beak for anything like that." As the sun rose, the fish left the shallow water near the shore and swam below into the cool depths toward the middle. The heron saw no more fish, and very glad was he at the last to breakfast on a tiny, tiny snail. The moral: do not be too hard to suit, or you may have to be content with the worst or with nothing at all. I saw a heron eat a rabbit one time. I swear. So it's no wonder this guy wasn't satisfied with a little perch. The Rooster and the Fox. One bright evening, as the sun was sinking on a glorious world, a wise old rooster flew into a tree to roost. Before he composed himself to rest, he flapped his wings 3 times and crowed loudly. But just as he was about to put his head under his wing, his beady eyes caught a flash of red and a glimpse of a long pointed nose, and there, just below him, stood Mr. Fox. "Have you heard the wonderful news?" cried the fox in a very joyful and excited manner. "What news?" asked the rooster very calmly. But he had a queer fluttery feeling inside him, for he was very much afraid of the fox. "Your family and mine and all the other animals have agreed to forget their differences and live in peace and friendship from now on forever. Just think of it. I simply cannot wait to embrace you. Do come down, dear friend, and let us celebrate the joyful event." "How grand," said the rooster. "I certainly am delighted at the news." But he spoke in an absent way, and stretching up on his tiptoes, seemed to be looking at something afar off. "What is it you see?" asked the fox, a little anxiously. "Why, it looks to me like a couple of dogs coming this way. They must have heard the good news and—" But the fox didn't wait to hear more. Off he started to run. "But wait," cried the rooster. "Why do you run? The dogs are friends of yours now." "Yes," answered the fox, "but they might not have heard the news. Besides, I have a very important errand that I had almost forgotten about." The rooster smiled as he buried his head in his feathers and went to sleep, for he had succeeded in outwitting a very crafty enemy. The moral: the trickster is easily tricked. I don't know about this one. It seems to me that a tricky guy would be pretty difficult to trick because he'd be very conscious of trickery, much so, more so than the rest of us. But that's just my opinion. I'm sure Aesop knows much better than me. The dog in the manger. A dog asleep in a manger filled with hay was awakened by the cattle, which came in tired and hungry from working in the field. But the dog would not let them get near the manger, and snarled and snapped as if it were filled with the best of meat and bones, all for himself. The cattle looked at the dog in disgust. "How selfish he is," said one. "He cannot eat the hay, and yet he'll not let us eat it, who are hungry for it." Now the farmer came in, and when he saw how the dog was acting, he seized a stick and drove him out of the stable with many a blow for his selfish behavior. The moral: do not grudge others what you cannot enjoy yourself. This is a good one for me to keep in mind. I was kind of like the dog in the manger a couple weeks ago when someone in Pennsylvania won the Mega Ball lottery, the $500 million lottery, and I didn't. I wasn't happy for them because I never win the lottery. And here someone was experiencing the winning that's been denied me. I haven't won even 10 cents at the lottery. The wolf and the goat. A hungry wolf spied a goat browsing at the top of a steep cliff where he couldn't possibly get at her. "Hey, that's a very dangerous place for you," he called out, pretending to be very anxious about the goat's safety. "What if you should fall? Please listen to me and come down. Here you can get all you want of the finest, tenderest grass in the country." Goat looked over the edge of the cliff. "How very anxious you are about me," she said, "and how generous you are with your grass. But I know you. It's your own appetite you're thinking of, not mine." The moral: an invitation prompted by selfishness is not to be accepted. I think that's advice that some of those characters in that show Game of Thrones would have done well to heed. If so, they probably would have lasted to the end of season 8. The Donkey and the Grasshoppers. One day, as a donkey was walking in the pasture, he found some grasshoppers chirping merrily in a grassy corner of the field. He listened with a great deal of admiration to the song of the grasshoppers. It was such a joyful song that his pleasure-loving heart was filled with a wish to sing as they did. "What is it," he asked very respectfully, "that has given you such beautiful voices? Is there any special food you eat? Or is it some divine nectar that makes you sing so wonderfully?" "Oh, yes," said the grasshoppers, who were very fond of a joke. "It's dew we drink. Try some and see." So thereafter, the donkey would eat nothing and drink nothing but dew. Naturally, the poor foolish donkey soon died. Whoa, that's depressing. The moral: the laws of nature are unchangeable. Yeah, nature can be inflexible and stubborn, and that's for sure. The mule. A mule had had a long rest and much good feeding. He was feeling very vigorous indeed, and pranced around loftily, holding his head high. "My father certainly was a full-blooded racer," he said. "I can feel that distinctly." Next day he was put into harness again, and that evening he was very downhearted indeed. "I was mistaken," he said. "My father was an ass after all." The moral: be sure your pedigree before you boast of it. The Fox and the Goat. A fox fell into a well, and though it was not very deep, he found that he could not get out again. After he had been in the well a long time, a thirsty goat came by. The goat thought the fox had gone down to drink, and so he asked if the water was good. "Finest in the whole country," said the crafty fox. "Jump in and try it. There's more than enough for both of us." The thirsty goat immediately jumped in and began to drink. The fox just as quickly jumped on the goat's back and leaped from the tip of the goat's horns out of the well. The foolish goat now saw what a plight he had gotten into and begged the fox to help him out, but the fox was already on his way to the woods. "If you had as much sense as you have beard, old fellow," he said as he ran, "you would have been more cautious about finding a way to get out again before you jumped in." And of course, the moral of the story: look before you leap. And that's a classic. Do you look before you leap? I typically do. A good example of that is when I pour cereal into a bowl. I always inspect the cereal before I put milk on it. One time when I was in my 20s, I lived in Boston, and I didn't. And there was a cockroach hiding in my cereal, and I almost spooned it into my mouth. So that's good advice. Look before you leap, and look before you eat. The cat, the rooster, and the young mouse. A very young mouse, who had never seen anything of the world, almost came to grief the very first time he ventured out. And this is a story he told his mother about his adventures. "I was strolling along very peaceably when, just as I turned the corner into the next yard, I saw two strange creatures. One of them had a very kind and gracious look, but the other was the most fearful monster you can imagine. You should have seen him. On top of his head and in front of his neck hung pieces of raw red meat. He walked about restlessly, tearing up the ground with his toes and beating his arms savagely against his sides. The moment he caught sight of me, he opened his pointed mouth as if to swallow me, and then he let out a piercing roar that frightened me almost to death. Can you guess who it was that our young mouse was trying to describe to his mother? It was nobody but the barnyard rooster, and the first one the little mouse had ever seen. If it had been not for that terrible monster, that mouse went on, I should have made the acquaintance of that pretty creature who looked so good and gentle. He had thick velvety fur, a meek face, and a look that was very modest, though his eyes were bright and shining. As he looked at me, he waved his fine long tail and smiled. I'm sure he was just about to speak to me when the monster I told you about let out a screaming yell, and I ran for my life. My son, said the mother mouse, that gentle creature you saw was none other than the cat. Under his kindly appearance, he bears a grudge against every one of us. The other was nothing but a bird who wouldn't harm you in the least. As for the cat, he eats us. So be thankful, my child, that you escaped with your life, and as long as you live, never judge people by their looks. And of course, the moral of this fable is, do not trust alone to outward appearance. That reminds me, when I was in college one summer, my girlfriend and I, we drove from California to Boston, and we camped in Joshua Tree National Park one night. It was a really nice, quiet campground. But we were there for about 30 minutes, and suddenly this group of Hells Angels-looking bikers pulled into the campsite right beside us. There were about 10 or 12 of them, and I thought, oh, geez, this is great. Well, while they were settling in, two of these big burly guys came over to my girlfriend and I sitting at our little picnic table. And they had leather jackets on and tattoos. And they say, well, we're going to be next door playing some music, drinking some beers. But if we're getting too loud, you make sure you come over and tell us, and we'll turn it down. We mean it. And so they really weren't very loud at all that night. The next morning, they were getting ready to leave, and the two same guys came over to us and asked if they had been too loud, and then wished us a safe trip. After they left, I walked through their campsite on my way to the restroom, and their campsite was immaculate. They had completely cleaned it up. So these guys, despite looking incredibly troublesome and tough, they were sweethearts. So I hope you enjoyed today's readings. And if you remember one thing from today's selection of fables and Aesop's words of wisdom, it's this. Make sure you check your cereal before you eat it. Have a good day.